For this Halloween season, I decided to do another horror manga video. 2 Halloweens ago, I did a video where I talked about 10 horror manga that I recommend, and this year I'm going to do another video where I follow up with another 10. So I'll get right into it, and for the first horror manga I want to talk about is actually the newest horror manga that I've picked up recently called Nikubami Honigashimi, which translates to flesh tearing, bone grinding. This manga is about a young man who's investigating the bizarre circumstances around his aunt's death. His aunt was a writer for an occult magazine, and despite being sort of the black sheep of his family, he was close to her and enjoyed listening to her stories about the paranormal. The story jumps back and forth between the present time and the past, where in the present time, the nephew is meeting up with a man named Mr. Osama, who was an associate of his aunt who would often accompany her on investigations for her magazine and help her out as a photographer, as well as making use of his psychic powers that give him the ability to sense spirits, making him someone that the aunt often would come to for advice on paranormal investigations. The main stories of the manga jump back to the past, looking on some of these investigations that Mr. Osama and the aunt would go on, which lead to them encountering various supernatural phenomenon, usually involving horrifying curses. The artwork in this manga really caught my attention right away because it has some really horrifying and very interesting creature designs and a ton of really creepy, disturbing faces and body horror involving people that are affected by these curses. This is a fairly new manga, so I don't know exactly where the story is going. It's not very far into publication, and only a little over a volume is currently translated into English, but it's one that I have really enjoyed what's come out so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where this one goes in the future, and I definitely recommend checking this one out. And next I have Hideout by Masasumi Kakizaki. This is a really cool short horror manga with some really incredible artwork. It starts out with a man and his wife going on a tropical vacation, but it's revealed that things are not as they seem as the couple are going through troubles following the death of their young son. And on this trip, the man plans to murder his wife and dispose of her body out in the forest. When he attempts to do this, he ends up failing and his wife escapes and runs off into a cave, and he pursues after her and he follows her, and they end up coming across a creature living out in the cave. And since this is a short story with a lot of twists and turns, I won't get further into the plot, so I don't reveal everything that happens. The standout thing to me about this horror manga is its incredible artwork that is extremely detailed, with a really cool, realistic style that makes the horror even more horrifying. It's a super short manga with only a length of a volume, but it actually packs in a more satisfying story than a lot of much longer manga. It's very fast-paced, and the story takes a lot of turns and shocking developments and wraps up in a pretty satisfying conclusion. So overall, it's definitely a manga that I recommend. Next, I have Pet Shop of Horrors by Akino Matsuri. I actually talked about the anime OVA based on this manga in last year's video where I talked about horror anime. That OVA is based off of a few of the early chapters of this manga, and while I think it's a pretty good adaptation of those chapters, I definitely recommend reading the full manga where you get the entire story of Pet Shop of Horrors. This manga is about the mysterious Count D, who runs a strange pet shop in Chinatown where people can come and get rare exotic pets. Count D provides his customers with mythical or magical creatures that are perfectly suited to the customer's desires or personal needs. Count D provides these pets to the customers alongside a contract that outlines what the customer must do to keep safe while handling these pets. And if the customer breaks the contract, Count D is not responsible for what happens to them, which in many cases will result in either the death or something horrible happening to the customer once they break that contract. Most of the chapters kind of play out in an episodic format where a certain customer will come into the shop and Count D will provide them with a pet that perfectly suits their circumstances and where the pet that they receive from Count D will develop the story in a way that either the customer will work through their issues thanks to the pet, or if they're like a bad person, a lot of times the pet will cause them to meet justice and get what they deserve in the end. There's a lot of variation in the stories. Some of them are heartwarming, touching stories, and some go more in a horror direction. As the manga goes on further, you get more story details around Count D, as well as some of the other characters, like a police detective who is investigating and suspecting Count D having guilt in a lot of the accidents or deaths that occur involving former customers of Count D. So some of the earlier chapters are more in a horror direction where it goes more story based later on, but the entire manga is very good and has really beautiful artwork and a lot of really interesting stories that provide something for everyone, with stories that are more horror based or mystery based and ones that are a little more lighthearted or heartwarming, touching stories. Next up, I have the Grim no Yuna Monogatari manga. This is a manga that consists of 2 volumes that are collections of short stories based on the Grimm fairy tales. This is written by Daijiro Morihoshi, who was in my last manga video for writing the Yokai Hunter manga series. This collection offers a lot of really unique takes on the classic Grimm's fairy tales, many of them going in a more bizarre or horror-like direction than you might be used to from these stories. I've really enjoyed these collections and thought a number of these stories offered a really unique twist or reimagining of the stories. Some of them are closer to what the original story was, where some of them take an entirely different perspective on the story. My favorite story in the collection was the story of Frau Trude, which originally was a very short Grimm's fairy tale that is only about a page long. And this story was reimagined into a story that was one of the longest in the collection. The story is about a child who was warned by their parents to not approach the home of a witch named Frau Trude. And the child ignores the parents' warnings and goes there and is turned into a log by the witch. This manga makes a much more fleshed out story based on this short fairy tale, creating entire characters based off of single lines from the original Grimm's text, and telling the story of a girl who hears of Frau Trude and becomes interested in her and goes to her house to look for her and has to go through various trials in order to meet her. This was probably my favorite story in the collection, but nearly every story took an approach that kind of caught me off guard and gave a totally new, unique approach to the famous fairy tales that was a way that I have never seen those stories approached before. It's a really interesting Japanese manga style look at these famous Western fairy tales. Next up, I have Mushihime by Masaya Hokazono. This story opens up with a high school student who's having recurring nightmares about a beautiful girl, and then one day she ends up transferring into his class and is immediately drawn to him. From there, all kinds of bizarre things start happening to him, as this girl is a sort of human-insect hybrid that has certain traits of various insects as well as the power to control insects. The story progresses with an almost horror/romance between the main character and the insect girl, while a group of scientists try to track her down and stop her before she becomes a threat to humanity. The art style in this series is really cool, with scenes that are horrifying yet also beautiful at the same time and just look really cool. There are a lot of scenes that are very detailed with swarms of insects attacking people that look really cool and will probably creep you out if you're afraid of insects or get creeped out by them. The story in this one isn't perfect, and the science behind a lot of what happens doesn't really make too much sense, but the artwork definitely carries it and is worth reading for that alone. And it's still a pretty entertaining story, trying to see what will happen to everyone. And next I have The Legend of the Slit-Mouthed Woman, which is a collection of short stories by the horror manga artist Kanako Inuki, who is one of the most well-known and prolific horror manga artists, whose work I haven't had a chance to talk about yet on this channel. But this collection is a pretty good introduction into her work. A good portion of the stories in this collection focus on the legend of the slit-mouthed woman, as well as other stories based on Japanese folklore and urban legends. Kaneko Inuki has a really unique art style that doesn't really look like any other manga artist I've ever seen. Probably the closest similarity to me would probably be the artwork of Hideshi Hino, who also has an art style that is in a way cartoony, but also very dark and gory. This series has a lot of scenes of body horror, with the stories featuring around the slit-mouthed woman who has her mouth cut ear to ear, as well as other stories that also have a lot of body horror and really horrifying, gory scenes with a very unique art style that makes this a pretty enjoyable read and definitely a good starting place if you're looking to get into Kaneko Inuki's work. And next up is Biomeat Nectar. This is a really cool, fun survival horror manga written by Fujisawa Yuki. It takes place in the future where, in order to solve the problems of food shortages and pollution, scientists create a creature that is able to eat basically any type of trash or waste other than things like metal or glass. These creatures are made to be able to rapidly eat garbage and quickly reduce society's waste problem. And then these creatures can be harvested for their meat and then also solve the problem of food shortages by offering a very cheap and abundant food source. This works for a while, but then these creatures end up escaping into the city where they're free to feed on anything, even people. And it becomes a huge disaster, and the story focuses on a group of survivors fighting for their life and trying to find a way to survive this disaster. This series has some pretty good survival horror elements, especially in the earlier chapters where the group is more helpless and desperately trying to survive while large amounts of people are being killed by these creatures. The story does hit a lot of the same beats that a lot of survival horror and zombie apocalypse type series hit, so it does have a somewhat similar feel to stories where there's a zombie apocalypse, but with the twist of having a different type of monster killing people. I wouldn't consider this a scary horror manga or anything, but everything plays out in a really entertaining way with a good amount of tension that keeps you reading and looking forward to what's going to happen next. When I first read this years ago, I ended up reading the entire 12 volumes straight through in a single night. So if you like survival horror or a series about a group of people trying to survive a disaster, this may be a cool series for you to check out. And next I have The Inugami Expert by Suehiro Maruo. This is a one-volume collection of stories by the Eroguro manga legend Suehiro Maruo, who wrote disturbing horror manga classics like Shoujo Tsubaki and The Laughing Vampire. This is a little bit less known manga from him, but still features some really incredible artwork in his signature disturbing art style, which is filled with all these bizarre, grotesque scenes with a really dark, eerie atmosphere. The stories in this collection are about a man who is an expert in dealing with curses and supernatural entities called Inugami. These entities are created when someone performs a ritual by starving a dog and then killing it, and while performing this ritual, cursing the people that they hate. And through this ritual, they create a malevolent entity that will bring harm on the people that are their target. In these stories, the Inugami expert is hired by someone who is being targeted by someone wielding an Inugami against them. And he comes in and uses his knowledge and powers to put a stop to it and turn the curse back around on the caster. The writing and plot of these stories is really nothing too spectacular, but the artwork is definitely what makes this manga special, which is the case with a lot of Suehiro Maruo's works. He has a really unique, distinct style that looks really cool, while also being very disturbing and grotesque. His artwork does contain a lot of graphic gore, as well as some sexual content, so this one isn't for kids or anyone who doesn't want to see that type of content, but if you think you're up for it, this short manga is a pretty cool read and a good introduction into Suehiro Maruo's works. And next I have Maneater by Yosuke Takahashi. This is a collection of short stories by a legendary horror manga artist that I don't believe I've talked about on this channel yet. He seems to be much more well known in Japan than in the United States, and is probably best known for writing the Gakkou Kaidan manga series, which is a famous horror manga that is about ghost stories and other various horror stories that happen at school. This would be another great addition to this list, but it is very difficult to find translations for it online, and I don't believe a full English translation even exists for this manga, And I wanted the manga in this video to be ones that are easily accessible. So I chose the Maneater collection because it's a good introduction into Yosuke Takahashi's work with translations easily accessible online. This collection contains a pretty wide variety of different types of short stories, with ghost stories, stories based on urban legends, stories about killers, stories with some body horror, all different types. So there's something for everyone in this collection. And now I have what is probably my strongest recommendation for a manga in this video, which is Urabaito by Shotaro Taguchi. This is about two friends named Yume and Nagomi, who, in order to quickly make a lot of money through a connection of theirs, take on high risk, high reward jobs, which always end up having a bizarre paranormal or supernatural element to them. The two girls were friends in high school and reunite in the first chapter when they take one of these jobs together. Yume has the ability to sense supernatural danger in the form of detecting a bad smell, and they use this ability to survive the first job that they take together. After this, they decide to team up and help each other survive through all of these shady jobs that they take so they can both earn a lot of money fast. Some of these jobs seem normal, like being a security guard overnight at a building or being a waitress at a cafe, but they all have some supernatural element to them that make this job very dangerous. So the girls have to work together to try to figure out where the danger is coming from on the job and work together to make sure that they both survive the work and get their money at the end. This is probably my favorite horror manga running right now, and all the different ghost stories that occur on the jobs that they take are really imaginative and keep me on the edge of my seat when I'm reading them. The artwork's really cool with a really great horror style, with the look of some of the ghosts and the horrifying faces that are shown, with some really imaginative settings and ghost stories that get set up, and it's really entertaining to see the girls working together to get through these events. This is a manga that keeps me really entertained and keep reading every single chapter and not being able to stop. If there's one manga in this video that you pick up, I would recommend it be Urabaito. And that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found something in this video that you end up liking. And if you like any of the manga in this video, it would mean a lot if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, because that helps my channel out a lot. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.